Hi, if you have any PY, please raise exclusively by どっちだ voice, please. Okay, so I'd like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Simply starting from setup. And secondly, I will talk about why in our side of the house, in their side of the house, less likely to have support. And lastly, on the contrary, why we can get more support from not only from inside but also outside. And I will talk about the outcomes of it. So let me start from the setup. So what we are supporting is the movement, which is saying family value are important. But the thing is, we don't have to necessarily say that we are supporting the traditional family value. Rather, regardless of size or scale, we have to do family value. We have to emphasize on family value. So this is our stance, and so let's move on to then why this is quite likely. Is simply this is quite intuitive, and that is because simply they are also raised in the community which has the family, and they are seeing the people who are doing those kind of things, who are raised in a peacefully and happily, or those kind of. In that case, those family value is important. It's quite intuitive, and they are also the one that they want to be um, LGBTQ person. It's also think they want to be recognized as a family member. So this is quite likely. Then, having said that, on the other hand, what is the movement they want to oppositions I want to pursue is dismantle of family value, and that is maybe because this is simply hetero oriented. Therefore, those kind of things is quite likely. Then why our side is far more better? Simply, in then let's move on to the why in their side how they can get less support from inside. As I already told you, this is quite unintuitive for LGBTQ movement people. Why LGBTQ member itself? Since they are not necessarily progressive, just their identities of LGBTQ. So they are not always say that they want to change the everything of traditional or everything of the status quo. So this is quite unintuitive that family values are quite sit because this is unconsciously we are believing that family members are super good. So this is quite because of their experience, because they are seeing this kind of family values are important. It's quite intrinsic to our intrinsic, and therefore this is quite unintuitive to say family values are bad. So this is super um, difficult. But secondly, it is super difficult to say since this is mental burdensome to deny family value, since gay people or those lesbian people don't have every friend of them is not necessarily the one LGBTQ. Rather, they have also some friends non LGBTQ. In that case, they also see the one who is raising the family in a good way and in a positive way, and they are doing a living a healthy life in their own. In that case, denial of those happy family is super difficult. Therefore, if they deny those things and they post Instagram about we are opposing the peaceful family, then that is super backlash and super difficult to communicate with others. In that case, this is super difficult to say and to involve this LGBTQ movement. Therefore, inside LGBTQ people, this dismantle of family member is likely to be less support. And comparatively, and also outside, they are doing the leading a healthy and peaceful livinghood. Therefore, it's quite unlikely that they are saying that we are opposing and they can accept. It's quite difficult because it's not bad things for them. So, then why our side likely to be better? Because we can get more support. Since inside community, as opposite of what I said, this is quite intuitive. The family members are good. This is also statistically agreed. For example, because we can do better with your partner, with as a marriage partner, without any of those blood connection. So that is far more better. So and secondly, for example, the gay community, they can create brotherhood well. In that case, this is statistically accepted. Those family membership or those kind of things are quite well done. And secondly, this is from outside. This is simply say that this is good because for many of them, the reason they opposing LGBTQ movement is not because they are it's because they are the one of the target of anti, but in that case they creating or they expand the scope of inheritance, or they expand the scope of visit hospital or getting more subsidy. Those kind of thing is not the one which is the opposed, because this is not involved of them. Therefore, they are not the target of anti. Therefore, it is quite likely to get support. Why that is better? Simply as in a very mild level, we can give more marital support for gay couple, or they can recognize as guardian in the school, or they can get more easily hospital, or they can do those medical decisions as a family member. Those kind of things are possible. And as a legislative level, at the end, they can get more better acceptance. And that is the reason support is important, since for legislative, they can get more collective power to sign or doing those kind of policy making. So that is super important. So those are the things which is most important things. Happy to propose. Thank you.
Okay, I thank the Prime Minister, Leader of Opposition, whenever you're ready.
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. I'm Mizuki Kusaka, a young speaker from the opposing opposition. Gender pronouns he, him, please. And if you have any POI, please do not vocalize, and please text in the chat box. I already opened the chat box and always check, so please do not vocalize. I don't want to take POI, but if I take, mandatory, closing, I prefer. Yeah. I'm going to start my speech within 3, 2, 1. Thank you, Chair. Previous speaker talked about in opposition paradigm, LGBTQ movement started to deny family value. I think this is fundamentally misrepresentation. So before moving on to my speeches, I'm going to clarify what kind of family value we are talking about, especially from the viewpoint of opposition. I'm going to clarify the nuance of family in opposition bench. I'm going to talk about two types of family value, A and B. A, we are talking about legal framework of marriage. What do I mean by that is that actually in many countries, most of the countries, actually marriage is legally admitted, which means that kind of contract is admitted by the state. And in the most countries, unfortunately, still has a high hurdle for legalizing the gay marriage, which means the same-sex marriage or LGBTQ marriage or so forth, right? Which means that in many countries, unfortunately, as a social narrative, if you do not legally marriage, surrounding people, society do not recognize these kind of couple as family. They are just a couple or lover, etc. Therefore, we think that this is a nuance of the family, first nuance of the family to begin with. What we have to recognize here is that on our side of Jesus, we say as a LGBTQ movement, you do not have to legally marriage. You do not have to legally marriage. Actually, for example, loving your partner, each other is still okay. It's also good thing. What we have to recognize here is that you don't necessarily have to hope the legal marriage, which means that, for example, partnership is okay, factual marriage okay, or even being single is also okay. This is the first nuance. Second nuance is about the children. which means that, for example, making baby and making a newcomer to those kind of family. Actually, if those kind of couples have the male body and the female body and conduct sexual intercourse, children can be born and they are called a new family member. And having the children is regarded variable in many countries and in many contexts. Also, in this case, in opposition bench, we say it's not matter means that it's not supreme happiness. You do not have to have children. You do not have to worry about. You don't have to mind. This is a nuance on our side of house, which means that, for example, loving partner each other is okay. As I told you, being single is still okay on our side of it. Yes. Important nuance is that we do not deny family value. Motions say family value do not matter. Therefore, we say it's not necessarily you have to get this as a nuance on our side of this house. Having this clarification, moving on to our point. I'm going to talk about who is the target on our side of this house and impact. Target of opposition bench is the LGBTQ people who cannot make the family structurally. For example, gay couple who are living in the state which do not legalize gay marriage, and those kind of states is unfortunately vast majority on this planet. For example, lesbian couple who cannot make baby by themselves because biologically it is impossible. What's the context background of this kind of target? Is that simply in most society, unfortunately, still not tolerant to LGBTQ people from three reasons. Why? Actually, traditional value is unfortunately still very, very, very strong. For example, marriage is marriage couple is very good one, or having a children is very, very good thing for you, or so forth. Because historically, unfortunately, LGBTQ people are likely to be disenfranchised. Their kind of voice are shut down. Those kind of presence itself are likely to be minimized by for example, governments or majoritarian people. They have to hide their own identity to begin, etc. Therefore, those kind of traditional value are settled. But B is that because even in this modern society, those kind of number of LGBTQ people is still minority, minority compared with the heterosexual people. Therefore, even in terms of the presence on the SNS, or for example, political sphere, actually it is difficult to get attention continuously. Or, for example, political power, voting power is unfortunately weaker than heterosexual people. Therefore, politicians are less likely to cater to these kind of LGBTQ people. C is that, therefore, even in the election, those kind of, for example, issue of LGBTQ, such as, for example, legalize gay marriage, etc., are less likely to be main point. Why? Because, for example, economical issue or social order, any other issues is more widely relevant to every single nation, regardless of gender or sex or so forth, right? Therefore, politicians are likely to focus upon these kind of the economy of, for example, diplomacy or social order, so forth, right? Therefore, as a context, for example, even on the government benches, for example, put things that are, for example, legalize gay marriage, etc., is still difficult on their side of this house. Conclusion is that our target is that those kind of LGBTQ people who have the extreme difficulty to make the families. Having so that, moving on to the impact, before that closing.
So on your side of the house, does social movements have incentive and capacity to advocate for example, like same-sex marriage or these things?
We do not talk about those kind of things. Okay, I'm going to talk about what's the impact and what kind of goal we are going to pursue in my second argument. Thank you for a nice introduction. Moving on to the impact. What we have to recognize here is that on their side of this house, if LGBTQ people say family is very valuable, we think it's very shocking and gives a psychological damage to the LGBTQ people entirely. Why? Because LGBTQ movement is existing as a psychological backup for LGBTQ people, because LGBTQ people are socially disenfranchised. The government do not help. The vast majority people do not care us, but movement exists to help us. Those kind of psychological existence backup is very important. But on their side of this house, LGBTQ movement say family is very good, important, valuable. This is emphasized on their side of this house. This is a kind of glorification. It says something good, something you should pursue. This kind of narrative can be made on their side of this house, which means that those kind of LGBTQ people already feel stress or microaggression for this traditional narrative and feel sense of inferiority. And they need psychological salvation, but they are betrayed. They feel they are betrayed by LGBTQ movement in daily life level. That kind of shock or, for example, depression have to be accumulated why I have to live on this very so cruel society, and those kind of psychological backup less function, unfortunately. Therefore, in daily life level, especially this is critically harmful for the people who are already abandoned in the society. That kind of dual harm and dual psychological impact can happen. This is crucially linked to our target. Why? Because LGBTQ movement exists in order to save people who are suffering, especially in terms of the sexual issue or gender issue, but LGBTQ movement directly harm them. That's why we think it is against the purpose of LGBTQ movement. That's why I'm happy to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, I thank the Leader of Opposition, Deputy Prime Minister.
聞こえますか？
はい、聞こえます。
ありがとうございます。と、はい、じゃあ、声は、声に出してお願いします。一応チャットも見るけども、まあ、声があったら、声出して、ぜひ、はい、という感じです。よいしょ。Then start in 3, 2, 1. Thank you, Chair. So the concept of family is not necessarily only a legal framework, but it's also a cultural framework. It is an image that is imprinted into a mind from the day we are born, and it is historically constructed that there is a mother, there is a father, and there are a few children, and they are living in what they recognize and what other people recognize as a family. Like legal framework, one, is something that people want in the first place, even the LGBTQ people, but also it's not necessarily that important in the first place, because we think that nobody knows whether somebody else is legally a family, but it is very important that we acknowledge that a lot of people see a group of people claiming that they are family, and that image is culturally constructed. And we think it is important that we advocate for family values, because that is precisely what these LGBTQ membership actually wants. They do want legal recognition. They do want social recognition that they are a family, just like the heterosexual couples are forming families. And we think it is absolutely hopeless for opposition to say that you don't necessarily have to care, and that is not going to cause much chaos, because it is about denying. Because what they're doing is actually an active denial of the value of family, saying that family cultural values is not important. And we think that is going to fragment the LGBTQ movement, and it's going to lead to worse outcomes for everybody within that movement. And that's why we provide this motion. So 3 things. Firstly, I'm going to talk about why we think the majority of the LGBTQs actually wants that really legal and cultural recognition, but second, as a family. But secondly, I'm going to talk about why we think this actually leads to political changes, and why we think that political change is mostly important for that LGBTQ people. So firstly, why do we think the majority of LGBTQs actually want this? Because firstly, I told you that family value is imprinted. They're born into a family. They're born into normally a heterosexual couple. They're born into a community which consists of different families and different families, and they're growing up in that kind of situation. We think that they are imprinted, that having a family and being able to claim a group of people as your family is very important, and getting the recognition that it is family is very important. But secondly, we think that people have a life outside of the LGBTQ group, which means that they have friends, they have other human relationships with people with heterosexual couples and families, meaning that they don't necessarily want to deny their happiness of claiming that they are family, because they don't want necessarily to antagonize them. They see that they are living peacefully and they are happy, and you have friendship formed with them. We don't necessarily think that they actually want to oppose the value of family in and of itself. So what happens when we do it? Firstly, we think that a lot of LGBTQ people would actually start to question what the movement is doing. They're going to fragment, create new groups and the different understandings of what family is. We think that we can actually cannot necessarily collectively mobilize together politically and actually get political changes. But then what are going to be the reactions of other people who are not LGBTQ? We think that when you say that, oh, families are not important, so your life, basically, you work every day in order to serve your family, which is a culturally important thing for you. And when you say that this is very not important, that's not necessarily something that is even valuable. Why are you keeping on talking about your family? We think that is an absolute denial for their identity, for their cultures and what they have believed. Now we think that on our side of the house, these people can actually accept different forms of family shapes and sizes because of a couple of reasons. Firstly, we think that there are a lot of precedences. Like, for example, marriage and families has been changed from like the same racial kind of families towards having more acceptance towards interracial couples, meaning that people do have the background of accepting different forms of marriages. We think that people already have historical knowledges that laws in the past have engaged in gayness and that kind of thing, and that's been a culturally important thing to do so. We think that they actually see adopted children being adopted into a couple, which doesn't necessarily involve any blood relationship or genetic relationship with that, but still having a happy life. So we think that the LGBTQ movement can appeal by using these kind of precedences and saying that there's absolutely no difference from marrying somebody who is not from the same gene, having a child who's not from the same gene, but you can still form a good family. And these are the things which are actually likely to be accepted by the majority of people, and then that is going to lead to better outcomes. Better outcomes. We think the impact is very clear. We still need political changes, like the opening opposition mentioned, that there are still like legislations for not banning gay marriages and these kind of things. These could be changed. My partner already also mentioned that how there's microaggressions, how there is like companies exclusively providing benefits for workers who are married heterosexually, but not to gay marriage, gay partners and that kind of things. So in order to tackle these kind of things, you need to act politically, and we need numbers for that. And that is why we can't necessarily afford to drop down the number of supporters. We think that in order to fight the heteronormative force, we are a strong establishment historically, have money and power, we're often linked to religion. We need a lot of people to join your force in a democratic setting. So we can't afford to fragment the movement by saying having LGBTQ movement members dropping out, as well as having a very big size force like the heterosexuals opposing, because they want to cling on to the value that family is important culturally and legally for myself. And that is going to be the delta here. So why do we think that this is very important for the LGBTQ movement, and why we think the LGBTQ movement should do this? Firstly, we think the impact is large because we told you about how legislative changes can actually happen better on our side of the house. We actually provide mechanisms of how we can involve a lot of more people, and when we have a lot more people, you can actually have more politicians listen to you by like we hear from the opening opposition analysis. But secondly, we think that if we compare those people who don't want to have families and people who want to have families, we should care about the people who are the majority of the members who are wanting the family. We told you how majority of the LGBT members already want that. And as if opposition is right, that these groups are existing for the psychological support for the members itself, we think it's important that you actually say that to your members, the majority of members, that we are on the side of you. We are going to advocate collectively for the good that you want. And that is going to be a massive benefit on our side of the house. But lastly, even for those people who doesn't necessarily like the meaning of family, we think this is very beneficial. Because the fact that you can get some changes politically is a very important hope for these groups of people as well. Because you can accept other changes into the future, not necessarily a recognition of like non-family kind of things, but like anti-discrimination laws in workplaces and these kind of things. And that is a moment you feel that you can actually have another force that is that you can cling on to, and you can actually join and be a part of, meaning that you can get benefits into the future. This creates hope for those people membership, for members at all levels, as well as it creates changes, and that's why we oppose. No, not oppose, but something. Okay.
Well, I thank the Deputy Prime Minister. Just a quick reminder that panels cannot take notes exceeding 7:15. Moving on to the DLO.
Again, can you hear me?
Yep.
Okay, thank you. 何言うんだっけ。ジェンダープロナウンス変わらず、he, him で、POI は、please do not vocalize still で、テキストにチャットフリーズです。I'm going to start my speech. 3, 2, 1. Go ahead. As DLO and last speaker of opening half, I'm going to talk about 3 issues in my speeches. First, let's talk about the main issue coming from the Tory government, which is about denial. But secondly, I'm going to talk about further extend my case, which is about individual harm. Finally, I'm going to talk about the comparison. So first, let's talk about the denial. The entire opening government talked about, in the opposition paradigm, the LGBTQ movement start to deny the family value and attack the family value. What we have to recognize here is that we already clarify, we do not say family value is very long, it's a kind of seed, because the nuance motion is that this is not the matter, right? It does not contain the very aggressive wording, right? For example, denial, for example, ban, or for example, jeopardize, etc. As opening opposition, I specifically talk about and catch the nuance of the motion. Therefore, point on their side of this house is that who have the strong antipathy or who started to leave the LGBTQ movement in the opposition paradigm, it is still unclear on their side of this. Because please think, we do not attack the heterosexual value, for example, who already legally get the, for example, marriage. How uniquely this kind of antipathy can be created and spread, we think it's not unrealistic. It's not realistic. But even if we accept this analysis, in the counterfactual, really the support will increase for the legislative changes. It's extremely unclear. Why? Because who uniquely start to support on their side of this, on the counterfactual, maybe, for example, the heterosexual people who already deeply think family is valuable, this kind of thing, LGBTQ movement close to our value, it is very a kind of sympathy, so why not support them? Maybe this kind of scenario can happen in the counterfactual. But we think this kind of the support is not good, rather it is very temporal and very small one. Why is that? Because actually those kind of people started to support LGBTQ movement because LGBTQ movement changes the stance. For this stance change, those kind of people have the sympathy. But these kind of people do not care or do not think the core value of LGBTQ movement to begin with, right? For example, how equalizing the right, or for example, how is a legalizing gay marriage, how is the LGBTQ movement suffering in the daily life level. For those kind of most important issue, those kind of new supporters do not have the strong incentive to begin with. Therefore, easily these kind of support can be for example, shut down or quit in terms of money, or for example, political campaign, etc. Or we already told you, if those kind of not LGBTQ people themselves have their own priority to begin with, how these kind of people have the strong incentive to prioritize LGBTQ issue, even in the, for example, voting, even though you have the only one vote. It is clearly unrealistic. Comparatively, we think the support for the LGBTQ member is much more important. I think, and in opposition governmental paradigm, these kind of core supporters, core members support will decrease. This is more significantly harmful. Why? Because please think, as I told you, on their side of this, as LGBTQ people themselves have started to have the strong complaint and less trust and less cooperation to the LGBTQ movement, as we already told you. Therefore, even though LGBTQ movement try to mobilize, for example, why not vote this politician? They are friend of us or so forth. LGBTQ people have the less incentive to gather vote. Or for example, even though movement to try to say why not gather the signature through the SNS or advocate, etc. Why not share or why not repost those kind of LGBTQ people themselves have the less incentive to do so, because they already distrust this kind of movement, because they already shocked to the stance changing of LGBTQ movement or LGBTQ movement. Therefore, those kind of LGBTQ movement are core supporter of this kind of movement, because that kind of movement is directly linked to own identity. This is fundamentally different of heterosexual people. Therefore, those kind of sabotage or less incentive of core member is most dangerous and detrimental for the LGBTQ movement, because continuously those kind of people can have the potential to support in terms of the money, or for example in terms of political, for example, campaign, etc. Therefore, it is difficult on their side of this house to continuously maintain the scale, for example, push registration or pressure politician, or for example, get attention in the society. Therefore, comparatively, it thinks that losing the core member of the LGBTQ movement should be prioritized. Therefore, even though we take the best case scenario, our side should be prioritized. Moving on to the second issue, which is about enhancing my partner's point. As my partner already told you, how, having a family, in the terms of legal framework, having a family is extremely difficult. On this point, previous speaker talked about the family includes a nuance of cultural meaning. Even though we take their best case scenario, still our side has a strong impact on the individual level. Why? Because even though in terms of the, for example, factual marriage or, for example, partnership, actually, even if those kind of system exist, still LGBTQ people have a strong difficulty to find the partner to begin with, because for example, confession has already, confess is still high hurdle, or even though you confess, whether or not the people who you love, really LGBTQ people, heterosexual people is unknown or so forth. Okay, どうぞ。桜井さん。
Even the legal framework is important, because what you're saying is that the legal framework is something that is only reserved for heterosexuals, and denying the culture as well is a denying that something is important means that you are telling people that you are being silly, that you are believing into something that has no value.
I know you misrepresent my nuance. I'm going back to my point. What we have to recognize here is that even if finding a partner is difficult to begin with, even if you find a partner, whether or not you can continue that kind of the relationship is actually unknown. Because, for example, your neighbors start to think this couple is a kind of strange. If those kind of neighbors are very biased, or if whether or not the company know the situation, you might be fired in the conservative area, unfortunately. Therefore, those kind of couples have to give up the relationship, unfortunately, broke up. Those kind of scenario, actually being single is also reasonable option. Therefore, do not matter, family value is extremely important. Finally, most important point is governing government failed to prove how you can change the society, how you can pressurize the politician and gather the vote even from the majority. As far as they fail this point, we think individual harm should be prioritized. That's why I'm happy to oppose. Thank you.
Okay, I thank the DLO member of COF.
Hi. I think I'm audible, and POIs in the chat, please. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. What the boring ground all people talks about, like how the support of the movement goes, decreases, increases. We are going to prove why uniquely by this strategy, family would accept you LGBTQ person and going to bring you more interesting, truly oratory field. But first I'm going to do more boring stuff, which is talking about LGBTQ people would less support the movement, which is complete counters at the opening position screen. Because family value actually matters. Because familial supporting system actually matters. Why it's the case? They said they would not like advocate for like same-sex marriage or this legal system because it is not important. We're going to say like these things are not important, new types of family values, etc., etc. This is opening a position screen. It actually matters in two ways. Firstly, because family can get the subsidies when they give a birth to the children, or they get the tax reduction if the couple is legally recognized by the government. But secondly, at every point of the time you write down about the public document or making the bank account or making the credit card, you and your husband, your like wife is not recognized as a legal couples, and like the people and like ministry would say, oh, you're not the legal couples, you have the mental dissatisfaction at every single point of the time. They said by the words and the magical like illustration of the new types of the family, new types of the couple is enough. I'm going to say, like, compared to these words, these daily level dissatisfaction, daily level less money, the more taxation would be more important mechanism for the LGBTQ people to hate this LGBTQ movement, because LGBTQ movement is doing nothing, and like you as a human likely likely to blame someone as a cause of your suffering. And also we have to point out now LGBTQ movement is advocating for the same-sex marriage, so this is regarded as a serious betrayal in your side of the house. So I think we're already won over opening a position. And I think Oji somehow talks about this, but we have weighed and actually why this matters, we have explained. Moving on to more important stuff. Family would accept you. All of the team assumes that this motion is about, hey LGBTQ people, family is very important, but not only about this. LGBTQ movement would say, hey, families and the new parents, you are important for the LGBTQ potential children. You should not say like, do you have the girlfriend or what types of the girl do you have? Because your children might be potentially LGBTQ. You should not potentially insult the LGBTQ person. You should have the careness about your raising children process. These types of things is the narrative we want to spread in our side of the house. When we will spread this, firstly through the social media, obviously we will add some like hashtag for the new families, for the new mothers or fathers or these kind of things to attract the attention of the new families and new mothers and fathers. And secondly, this is very important. At every period, annual checking of the maternity people, we would like to tell some of the lectures like your children might be the LGBTQ people. This lecture is done officially in the hospital for the mother who have newly given birth to their own child to inform that there is a person who might be LGBTQ people. There's a collaboration between the hospitals and the LGBTQ movement. This is uniquely done in our side of the house. Why the parents then are likely to listen these types of instruction coming from the LGBTQ movement? Because one, parents cares most about their children, especially when their children is a baby, very infant, very weak, and want to protect from all of the potential harms in the future. That is the moment the LGBTQ movement can tell the potential harm of your words when you're throwing at the teenage points of the LGBTQ person. Here is why you can persuade them. But secondly, because the majority of the parents do not have the prejudice about the LGBTQ person, but in many cases they don't know what the LGBTQ person thinks. What types of the word is actually insulting for LGBTQ person. We would like to give you the knowledge for the parents who are mostly caring about the children at the moment of maternity or these kind of things. Why LGBTQ movement are likely to do this? It is very, very simple. Because the LGBTQ movement knows here is the best moment to persuade the parents, because I think the baby period is a mostly biologically adorable period your children is. So like LGBTQ movement, it's likely to like utilize this unique moment. Why is this exclusive? There are two reasons. Firstly, because when you're talking about, familial value is not so important, you have less collaboration with hospitals and the public institutions such as local government. Why? Because these institutions want more children to sustain their own hospital management or on their local government management. You do not want to collaborate with a potential harming institution, LGBTQ movement saying, family value is not so important. You don't have to make family or these kind of things. Secondly, parents, they themselves do not want to listen to this random institution, because parents knows you have a unique blood connection between you and your children, but random organization is now kicks in and say, this tie is not so important. Here's the moment parents would lose the incentive to listen whatever the LGBTQ movement would say. So that's why in our side of the house, uniquely we can persuade the parents not to insult, not to use the what was potentially insult LGBTQ person. You should accept the LGBTQ person when your children is confessing about their own gender minority identity. Impact here is very simple. When you confess about your identity, you're likely to be accepted, and the parents are likely to have some potential insulting words to the children. Weighing is very simple. Firstly, we can persuade the most the effective target in today's motion. Note, as I said, that the baby is biologically adorable for the most of the parents, and most of the parents are likely to listen these types of words compared to just average voters who have other things to care about, economical conditions, subsidy for their own business jobs, or opening opposition talks about LGBTQ people themselves. I think I have already flipped, but maybe these people, even if their side is true, maybe these people anyway supports your movement because this is the only source of your rights to be actualized. Compared to that the unknowledged parent is most be persuaded, but most have like the delta in today's world. Very proud to propose.
Okay, I thank the member of Gov, member of Up whenever you're ready.
Hello, am I audible?
Yeah.
Hello, my name is Nari, he, him pronoun, and POI is verb. My speech with the First of all, I would like to explain what exactly a family value looks like in this debate. I think this debate kind of like tilts to the context where it is relatively liberal, but I think there are a majority of instances where people still have a traditional family values. For example, like patriarchal characteristics, like nuclear family, or it looks like how people still embrace religious family values. For example, when it comes to Christianity, they like father have some sort of like mental obligation to fulfill the role of earning money, being strong and stuff like that. But at the same time, mother have some sort of like psychological pressure to fulfill the role of making house a comfortable places and allow their fathers to recover from the capitalistic hard work and stuff like that. But it also applies to broad context. For example, even when it comes to Islamic context of Buddhism, it still embraces how like family is probably going to be composed of father, mother, and children. I think that sort of like context is still relevant in this debate. An implication of this analysis is how like OG's cases kind of depends on how people are probably going to accept family values, like interracial marriage being accepted also implies how people are also like able to accept LGBT marriage and stuff like that. But we say, first of all, the mechanization was kind of lacking because when it comes to that sort of like things, traditional family value is historically like intergenerationally affecting individuals. So it is not only about like individuals like perception towards LGBTs, but also they have to respond to the like expectation from their grandparents and stuff like that. I think that sort of like mechanization was quite lacking, why this is going to be a tipping point. But second of all, it is also like relevant to the case of CG when they talk about how family is going to accept you. It is also quite unclear exactly how like people actually internalize it. There are some sort of like mechanization on people put hashtag on their posts and stuff like that. But we think like average like conservative people don't really come through these sort of like SNS in the first place because they are like adapted through like SNS algorithm. They don't really see these LGBTQ issues and stuff. But even if that was not to be the case, I think the priority, like psychological priority that these parents have is going to be still relevant when like they have other issues to care about, for example, like feeding their children to be able to be independent and stuff like that. I think they don't have much like psychological resources to be able to care about every single like words that they give to their children and stuff like that. I think in that regard, their case doesn't stand as well. The next of all, I'd like to move on to my extension on opening opposition, talking about how community is sometimes going to be weaponized in a way that it isolates people who don't have family and stuff like that. But I would like to extend further to the opposition counterfactual on what exactly people prioritize instead of family value. And that was quite unclear at the end of opening opposition. This, the community other than family exactly looks like how these movements prioritize LGBT spheres or prioritize the value of friends or prioritize other pressing issues, for example, like anti-discrimination laws or genderless restrooms and stuff like that. I think there will be more emphasis and resources or investment put onto these community forming outside of the families and stuff like that. So I would like to explain about the benefit, why focusing on these sort of other like sphere is going to be important. First of all, that we allow people who have trauma through the experience of families. For example, like people who came out to their families and being denied or being discriminated, or there are some like people who have pressure to from their grandparents to see the grandchildren and stuff like that. That sort of people have some sort of like traumatization related to family values. That sort of people is going to be massively isolated. Whereas on our side of the house, allowing a individual to have free and flexible decision making, they're able to opt out from that family, or probably have more emphasis on how family is not only the solution that they have. But also, second is that we are able to accept people who don't have like sexual desires or sexual not being sexually attracted to any other people as well. So this family value sometimes involve like love, emotion, and stuff like that. But there are tons of people who don't have romantic emotion in the first place. So we also allow these people to be able to have to sympathize with the movement in itself. So I would like to provide the impact of this argumentation. First of all, is that we are able to put more resources and investment to community forming instead of embracing family values and stuff like that. Probably on their side of the house, they focus on legislative changes regarding legal framework to allow people marry. But on our side of the house, we use these resources to, for example, like establish sharing houses within the LGBT movement, which probably 50 or 60 people can live in the same apartment or the building, so that they can form a family, even if they don't have much connection with their own families, or they are probably going to be dismissed by their families. They are able to opt into that sort of things. But also it looks like how these movements are probably going to provide people with more support for job hunting. Instead, on their side of the house, they are likely to form a system where one people works and one people probably stays at home and they grow their own children and stuff like that. I'll take point from OG.
Thank you. So the funny thing is that those people with trauma or those people who do not have desires may not necessarily be anti-families, because we tell you that they have other lives which interacts with other people who have families and is actually living peacefully, but they don't necessarily want to interrupt with their peaceful lives.
So yeah, I think that is partially true, but the context that we provided from the get-go is how majority of people who perceive this messages are probably going to internalize in a way that family value is something traditional, so that they can't much have spaces to exercise their own show up their own identity and have a family connection at the same time. So I think this case is still going to be relevant. So moving on to the impact on how this is very important. The weighing here is that government counterfactual is going to be rather individualistic, because people don't really give a shit about other families because they have to feed their own family in the first place. But when it comes to opposition counterfactual, we empower individuals who don't necessarily have a community, that we allow like communal sort of like leisures and stuff, but also giving them a sense of validation and approval from other people, that family is not going to be the primary interest of these individuals, so that they can pursue their own identity as well. So we oppose. Thank you.
Okay, I thank the member of opposition. Lastly, Government Whip to conclude the Gov bench.
Okay, so yeah, I think I'm audible. Yeah, I can take point. However, okay, so I would like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1. 4 pieces of weighing of our case over OG. Firstly, there's uncertainty more. So OG's impact has high burden for several reasons. Firstly, it involves anti-LGBTQ groups. You have to persuade these people, the voter base of populist politicians, right? Convincing them is very hard, and I don't know how they do it. Secondly, it takes a long time. Even if it's possible to persuade those people, it takes several years to make a significant change, or for the significant change, it takes decades. But thirdly, OO pointed out good point, like other issues issues are discussed in the political sphere, even if you get like, agreements, I don't know how they will be discussed on their side of the house. But even if policies change happens, like as OG said, like there's a heteronormative norm exists, as OG themselves said, right? So I don't understand how their impact will be achieved. Our burden is simple and felt well. Firstly, there's a clear illustration of mechanism because you say family is important, which the local government or hospitals, Sanfujinka, agree. That's why uniquely you can access advocacy in the hospitals, which is actually the biggest delta in this debate. But also we explained most people are ignorant of LGBTQ people, not necessarily hating those people, because minorities are invisible, and opposition side also said that these things are not discussed in the politics, rather economies are prioritized, which means that awareness will be the tipping point for family members to be careful, not to, for example, to give gender neutral names or to be careful with unintentional microaggressions. So I would like to point out very important points. So even if some families don't follow this instructions, in order for OG's arguments to stand, you have to persuade majority of the people in the parliament or citizens, right? Versus our case at least stands. For example, even if like just 10% of the families were persuaded by our the movement, which means that the 10% of the children would be saved from the microaggressions. But in order for OG's impact to be stand, you have to persuade 51%, which is a higher burden for them. The second piece of weighing is the impact. Why this argument is so impactful? Firstly, you cannot opt out from your family members. Basically, it continues many times. But secondly, you spend much time with them in the childhood, right? And basically, childhood is a very, very impactful period. You are likely to get traumatized more in terms of the childhood. But thirdly, there is a long-term impact, because when microaggression happens, it worsens relationships. And it's actually also bad for family members, right? Because you cannot get support from their children when they get older. You cannot, access to accessible like elderly care, for instance. That's why this motion is not actor motion. That's why our impact is far bigger. But also we pointed out that the target of our impact is very big. The centrist parents about this issue of LGBTQ movements, the population of these people are larger than they imagine, right? Because most of the people are ignorant of these issues. That's why we are dealing with actually the very big portion of population. Third piece of weighing, there's a meta debate perspective. So opening has deadlock about this family values, right? So the OG says like this family value includes new family relationships. Opposition said traditional values are basically emphasized. So there is a deadlock, and both are assertive, and we don't know which kind of interpretation of this word is unique. So we engage to opposition's illustration, right? So we are saying that yes, even if this family value means the very conservative value, our argument stands, because we are saying the LGBTQ movement is saying that yes, traditional family value is important, and that's why you parents have to learn about LGBTQ people, and you are very, very impactful to these people, and that's why you have to learn. So that's why our argument is basically engaged in their best case illustration of the family value, as opposed to opening government basically giving some assertive counter claims or counter illustrations, which is not basically proven why it's more likely. But fourthly, we prevent harm, not like healing some kind of harm, right? So we stop parents from doing microaggression before it give harm, which means that it's logically prior, or basically like chronologically prior. We are preventing the harm to happen, and that's why our argument is superior. So it basically shows why we are over OG. Then let's deal with some other opposition's case, right? So first about CEO. So firstly, I think OG had a good point of information. People are traumatized by the specific family member, not necessarily the entire family relationship themselves, right? So I think the CEOs didn't fulfill this burden of proof. Why? Like those children or LGBTQ people are likely to hate the entire family value itself, rather than specific family value that you had with your parents or something like that. But secondly, on their side of the house, LGBTQ movement movements actually cannot enter in those conservative states in the first place. Because even if you legalize same-sex marriage, for example, like you still have rights to get married. For conservative people, still have a right to marry, and that's why we are, like giving the very consistent like the values advocated in the conservative the states. But on their side of the house, LGBTQ's advocacy is seen as the threat to traditional value, right? Because it indirectly denying the family value, which is very, very central to their identity, and that's why it's the tipping point, right? So, which means that, for example, community building, it's very impossible because in the first place you cannot build, office in those conservative areas because basically it's very dangerous. For instance, that's why those conservative people cannot access to these LGBTQ movements. But maybe censorship also happens in social media. But thirdly, the engagement talking about engagements to us. So they said that the conservative parents won't accept like the instructions given by the LGBTQ movement. But firstly, this is a mitigation, right? But secondly, the population is actually smaller than the opposition imagined because many people don't know it's deprioritized in politics. But even if those conservative parents don't accept the explanation by the LGBTQ movements, we showed why the population of those people is actually very small, and that's why other centrist parents are likely to be persuaded because they love babies, because they love those vulnerable children. Actually, our case is the real experience of me. I visited hospitals and actually talked about these people with the NPOs groups. And actually, this is a common practices given by LGBTQ movements, actually unique to our side. For those reasons, proud to propose.
Okay, I thank the government whip, lastly opposition whip.
Am I audible?
Yep.
Thank you. If you have any Y, please voice out. I never check my chat. No, any general pronouns is okay. Oh. Okay. I'd like to start my speech in 3, 2, 1, go. In order to live happily as individual, as like minority, especially minority in minority community, so we're proud to oppose this motion. I have 4 things to say. First, let me check our contribution and checking their traditional value itself, and then the secondly, let me compare with OO, and thirdly, let's check OZ, fourthly, CZ. Firstly, let me check their contribution. I put it clearly told you we are sharing the traditional value of the marriage or something, some kind of family, and we think because of that, but we clearly we think because of that in government paradigm some attention of the LGBTQ movement couldn't be succeeded, but as my person clearly told you, in our counterfactual, we can much more easier to live by having the LGBTQ community that is not cut off minority in minority community. Minority community, and we think I want to tell about traditional value is still remain because firstly as proof of that, as often government said, in the status quo, majority in minority community, majority in LGBTQ movement is like obsessed to legal marriage and having the like form of the similar form of the family to the traditional family, right? And secondly, also like that kind of the traditional value, traditional family is showed again and shown again and again, like in like the pop culture or like in the daily lives, like because like the majority of the hit movie is so heteronormative in order to like attract the majority of people in that society. So like the traditional value of family is so likely to remain still even now. And let me move on to like comparison. Also, like like we can also like the legal change is so difficult, and we can like accept the many people like all people in the minority community, but like there is no any explanation about the like detailed counterfactual, like how they will like achieve that goal. But as my person clearly told you, we already tell the like clear counterfactual, like having the shelter or something so on. So like we think like in order to showing the like delta of the that argument, our like mechanization is like crucially needed. So like we override all. And let me move on to Ozzy. Ozzy said like there is practical benefit of the legal or like typical form of the family or like marriage, but there is no explanation of why you have to cut off the most vulnerable people and they're like protecting the only prestigious people, like, and they're like make that kinds of prestigious people to get much more privilege by their tax exception or something so on by marriage. And we think we should prioritize like minority and minority or like whole people in that LGBTQ movements, rather focusing on the majority of people in that community. Because I have three reasons. Firstly, as practically, like most vulnerable people have like much more need to having some kind of support from that movement or community, because they are unlikely to having their more resources rather than like white gay people in America. For example, like white gay people in America, we're likely to having the much more like social status or money rather than like a single asexual female or like transsexual transgender people or something so on.
Point.
So, okay, take.
Okay, so we focus on the majority of the minorities because they are majority, but minorities also may not oppose family values, but also having some level of changes may serve as a hope towards the minorities that some other good changes for them may happen into the future.
Okay. In order to achieving that legal or some kind of goal of the majority in that minority community, minority people in minority community will cut off during the process of that. So like how they feel that hope, I can't understand that. And also like so like we think we should like having the much more like includable system. And secondly, about the accessibility, like family is like people who are having the family or like the partner is so like prestigious and like having the like social capital. Rather, like we think like it's much more important to having their system or like having their some kind of support for all people. And also, principally, like the cutting off someone and having the gap is same with discrimination in current situation. So like the focusing on the majority in that movement is same with that like the discrimination to someone, and like it is what the LGBTQ movement is like basically accusing. So we proud to oppose this motion. That was thank you.
Okay, I thank the opposition whip and I thank you all for a wonderful debate. Yeah, so please move to the Discord rooms to hear the OAs from the competitive judges. Thank you.